Welcome to the Awakening Purple Light. Today, we step into the story of a man who forced Buddhist history to ask a question that remains unanswered even today. If a person is truly enlightened, do they need to look like an enlightened person? Drukpa Kunley, the Lama known by the name the Mad Saint of Tibet. At the end of the 15th century, in the Himalayan region, a land of snow-covered mountains and deep valleys, religion stood at the center of human life. Monasteries were schools. Monasteries were governments. Monasteries were places where people entrusted their fear of death and their hope for the next life. In that world, the image of a monk was more than a spiritual symbol. It was a symbol of stability. A proper practitioner was expected to speak slowly, to control emotions, to keep distance from everyday life, to become an image that the community could trust, a sign that order still existed. In the year 1455, within that very world built on discipline and ritual, a child was born in central Tibet. No one in his family, no one in his community could have predicted that this child would one day shake the entire idea of enlightenment in Himalayan Buddhist culture. His name was Drukpa Kunley. From a young age, Kunley was sent into religious education. He learned quickly. He had an extraordinary memory. Later records suggest that he could grasp complex Tantric teachings that even many mature practitioners struggled to understand. He was trained in the Drukpa Kagyu lineage, a branch of Vajrayana Buddhism known for its direct meditation methods and deep esoteric transmissions. More importantly, Kunley became a disciple of Pema Lingpa. Pema Lingpa was not an ordinary teacher. He was regarded as a tertone, a revealer of hidden teachings believed to have been concealed by Padmasambhava centuries earlier. In Vajrayana Buddhism, studying under a tertone is not merely an academic opportunity. It is considered a sign of spiritual destiny. In his early years, Kunley appeared to be following the perfect path toward becoming a respected Lama. He studied scriptures. He studied meditation. He studied Tantra. He understood the philosophical structures of emptiness, the self, and enlightenment. He possessed everything Tibetan religious society expected from a successor to tradition. But oral accounts tell us that even at a young age, Kunley asked questions that left his teacher silent. Not because the questions were wrong, but because they went straight to what many practitioners avoided confronting. One story tells that during a lecture on monastic discipline, Kunley asked, "If a person follows rules because they fear being judged, is that wisdom, or is it fear dressed up as morality?" No one answered. Not because the question had no answer, but because it touched a place many practitioners had never dared to enter. Those who studied alongside Kunley later said that he carried two parallel personalities. On one hand, he possessed an unusually deep capacity for meditation and absorbed teachings with remarkable speed. On the other hand, he often disrupted solemn moments with laughter or unexpected remarks. In a monastic environment where silence was considered a sign of wisdom, Kunley's laughter confused many. Yet some began to notice him in a different way. They felt that his laughter was not disrespectful. It felt like a way of revealing something that had long been hidden. After completing his formal training, Kunley faced a choice familiar to many Vajrayana practitioners. He could continue on the traditional path, become a teacher, hold an official role within the monastery, serve as a guardian of the religious system in place, or he could step outside that system. There are no official records explaining what led Kunley to his decision. He left the monastery without conflict, without announcement. He simply left. From that moment on, Drukpa Kunley began turning his life into a journey that history would later call the path of the Mad Saint. Instead of remaining within the protection of tradition, he stepped directly into the world that monks usually avoided. He traveled through poor villages. He slept in people's homes. He ate with them. He listened to their stories. For many ordinary people, it was the first time they had seen a Lama speak to them as an equal. No rituals, no distance, no symbols of authority. But it was also here that rumors began to spread. Some said Kunley had lost his discipline. Some said he was insulting religion. Others whispered that he was teaching something they had never heard inside a monastery. In many Himalayan traditions, there is a belief that some practitioners who reach deep levels of realization may live in ways that cannot be understood by conventional standards. Such people are called Nyenpa, holy madmen, but that title is not always praise. It is also a sign of fear, because when someone no longer lives according to familiar social roles, they become a mirror, forcing others to question their own roles. During his early wandering years, Kunley began doing the very thing that would make him famous throughout the Himalayas. He composed songs, not traditional chants, but folk songs, sometimes humorous, sometimes satirical, yet always carrying questions that lingered long after the laughter faded. These songs spread through village gatherings, through harvest festivals, through evenings around the hearth. Gradually, the name Drukpa Kunley appeared in stories, not as a preaching teacher, but as someone who made people look back at themselves. From there, his life entered a phase that Tibetan and Bhutanese traditions would retell for centuries. A phase where he was no longer just a practitioner. He became a phenomenon that Himalayan society both feared and felt irresistibly drawn to. No one knows exactly where Drukpa Kunley traveled in the early years after leaving the monastery. Official historical records remain almost silent about this period. But in folk memory, those years appear more vivid than any written chronicle. People say he appeared in places where monks rarely set foot, roadside taverns along merchant trails, noisy markets where nomads traded salt for barley, low wooden houses where farming families slept together around the fire to survive the long winter. In Tibetan society at the time, a lama entering such spaces was not merely inappropriate. It was considered a loss of religious dignity. Monks kept distance from worldly life. That distance created reverence. That distance created authority. But Drukpa Kunley broke that distance naturally, as if he had never known it existed. One story from the Paro Valley tells of an evening when villagers gathered to drink after the harvest. A stranger entered the tavern. He sat among the crowd, ordered a drink, and began telling stories like any ordinary traveler. No one recognized him as a lama. As the atmosphere grew lively, he suddenly began to sing. It was not a chant. It was a song about people who spend their entire lives reciting prayers, yet still live in fear of being judged. Everyone laughed. Laughter filled the room, but when the song ended, silence fell. A heavy silence, as if each person had just heard a piece of their own story. Only afterward did the villagers learn that the man sitting among them was Drukpa Kunley. Rumors spread quickly: a lama who sings in taverns, a lama who drinks with ordinary people, a lama who writes satirical poems about monks. In some places, he was welcomed. In others, he was seen as dangerous, not because he taught something false, but because he taught in a way that pulled people away from what felt familiar. Monasteries began to hear about him. Some monks viewed him as a threat. Others were curious and wanted to meet him. A few elders were said to have sent invitations, asking him to return to the monastery in hopes that he would resume traditional discipline. One famous anecdote tells that when Kunley arrived at a large monastery in southern Tibet, the monks prepared an elaborate reception. They laid out carpets. They prepared a meditation chamber. They lit incense and arranged a seat of honor. Kunley stepped into the monastery courtyard, looked around for a long moment, and then asked a question that made everyone present fall silent. He asked, "If you need to prepare so many things to receive a person like this, then what are you honoring? Wisdom or an image?" No one answered. Not because the question could not be answered, but because it touched something the entire religious system was trying not to see. After that meeting, some monks were furious with him, but others quietly left the monastery to follow him, not to become his students, but simply to observe how he lived. Those who traveled with Kunley later said that he almost never taught in the traditional way. He did not sit on a teaching throne. He did not explain scriptures in a formal sequence. He taught through unexpected situations. Once, a student asked him how to escape desire. Kunley did not answer right away. He simply invited the student to drink alcohol with him. When the student refused out of fear of breaking vows, Kunley asked, "If you are that afraid of a single cup of alcohol, then what is controlling you? Desire or fear?" Questions like these made many people feel challenged, but they also caused people to begin doubting their deepest motivations. In Vajrayana Buddhism, there is a philosophy that instinctual energy is not the enemy of enlightenment. It is raw material, but that material must be transformed through awareness. If it is not, it becomes bondage. Drukpa Kunley is often seen as someone who used his own life to test this philosophy. He did not avoid worldly life. He stepped directly into it. One of the most controversial aspects of his life was his relationship with women. Folk stories say that he had many romantic relationships. For many monks of that time, this was proof that he had abandoned the path of enlightenment. But within Tantric tradition, these relationships are sometimes interpreted as symbols of the union between wisdom and life energy. This is what makes Drukpa Kunley such a difficult figure to judge in history. He stood at a boundary that many spiritual traditions try to avoid, the boundary between transformation and indulgence. As he continued traveling south through the Himalayas, his reputation began to spread into Bhutan. At that time, Bhutan was a land still shaping its religious and political identity. Local rulers, monasteries, and village communities were all searching for spiritual symbols that could bring stability. And then came the story that took place in the Punaka Valley, a story that later became central to the legend of Drukpa Kunley. Bhutanese tradition says that the Punaka region was suffering from a series of disasters. Crops failed, disease spread, livestock died in large numbers. People believed that a female demon was bringing misfortune to the land. Community leaders sought out Drukpa Kunley, hoping he would perform a traditional exorcism ritual. But instead of preparing complex ceremonies, Kunley used a symbol that Bhutanese tradition later called the lightning bolt of wisdom, a sacred fertility symbol representing enlightened energy in Tantra. According to legend, he used this symbol to subdue the force believed to be the demon. After that event, people believed the disasters ended. The temple of Chimi Lhakhang was later built on the site where the event was said to have occurred. To this day, the temple remains one of the most sacred places in Bhutan. Many couples come there to pray for fertility, and fertility symbols are still painted on Bhutanese homes as signs of protection. What is striking is that Bhutanese people do not view these symbols as obscene. They see them as reminders that life and spirituality are not separate. After the Punaka event, Drukpa Kunley did not become a religious leader. He did not build an organization. He did not hold any position of power. He continued to wander. But from that moment on, he was no longer just a controversial practitioner. He became a cultural symbol, a symbol that forced Himalayan society to face a question they had never dared to ask. If enlightenment does not need to look serious, are people willing to accept it? After the story of the Punaka event spread throughout Bhutan, Drukpa Kunley was no longer an unknown wandering practitioner. People began to whisper about him, not because they feared him, but because they were unsure how to understand him. To ordinary people, he was a teacher who felt approachable and liberating. But to many monasteries, he began to feel deeply unsettling, not because he taught something contrary to Buddhist teachings, but because he did something Buddhist teachings rarely dared to do. He made people question how they were practicing religion. One of the most frequently told anecdotes occurred When Drukpa Kunley was invited to a large monastery in Bhutan, after his reputation had spread, the monks debated for days before deciding to invite him. Some believed he was an enlightened practitioner. Others believed he was someone who stained religious honor. When Kunley arrived, the monks prepared a grand ceremony. They arranged a teaching throne. They prepared offerings. They chanted prayers to purify the space. But when he entered, Kunley did not approach the throne. He walked past it. He sat down on the floor among the young monks. Silence filled the hall. After a while, he asked, "Why do you chant?" One monk answered that they chanted to purify the mind. Kunley smiled. Then he asked, "If your minds are already purified, why are you still afraid of being judged by others?" There was no reply, only the sound of wind passing through the monastery windows. Stories like these gradually turned Drukpa Kunley into a deeply divisive figure. Some monks believed he was weakening religious discipline. Others began to wonder whether that discipline was hiding something. In Vajrayana Buddhism, there is a belief that ego does not exist only in material ambition. It also exists within spiritual roles. A person can renounce wealth, yet still cling to the identity of being enlightened. Drukpa Kunley is seen as someone who directly targeted this form of ego. He did not argue through philosophy. He created situations that forced the ego to reveal itself. One story tells of a monk famous for his ascetic life who came to Kunley to prove his spiritual practice. The monk said he had meditated for many years, eaten minimally, and avoided all temptations. Kunley listened for a long time. Then he asked, "If you no longer desire anything, why do you need me to acknowledge it?" That question caused the monk to leave in silence. No one knows whether he felt offended or liberated. But the story is retold as an example of how Kunley dismantled the need for validation in spiritual practice. One of Kunley's most distinctive teaching methods was placing students in situations they could not anticipate. Once a student asked him how to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. Kunley did not answer. He simply handed the student a flask of alcohol. The student refused out of fear of breaking vows. Kunley took a sip and said, "If a single cup of alcohol can make you this afraid, then what is binding you is not the alcohol." Stories like these caused many people to misunderstand Kunley, believing he was encouraging the breaking of vows. But within Tantric tradition, his actions are seen as a way of pointing out the difference between action and motivation. In Vajrayana philosophy, action itself does not create karma. The motivation behind the action is what determines everything. Drukpa Kunley is often described as someone who lived without needing to protect a moral image of himself. He did not try to make other people think he was pure. He also did not react when he was called crazy. He let every judgment exist without arguing with it. That attitude is exactly what turned him into a living paradox. A man seen as someone who shattered the religious image, yet someone who led many people back to the deeper spirit of Buddhism. In many folk stories, Kunley is described as someone who could read emotions other people were trying to hide. He often used humor to expose those emotions. Once, he walked into a solemn chanting ceremony and suddenly burst out laughing. When people asked why, he said he had just seen people chanting while secretly thinking about how others were judging them. His laughter made many people angry, but it also made some realize they were living inside a role. In Himalayan culture, Drukpa Kunley gradually came to be seen as the embodiment of a spiritual trickster figure, someone who breaks order to recreate it, someone who disrupts the structure to reveal what the structure is built on. But his life was not only philosophical stories. It was also the life of a real human being crossing harsh lands, facing loneliness, misunderstanding, and sometimes hostility. Some stories say he was chased out of villages because people feared he would make their children doubt tradition. In other places, he was invited to stay for months because villagers believed his presence brought a sense of peace. What made Kunley's life so unusual was that he never tried to explain himself. He did not write philosophical essays to defend his behavior. He lived, and he let others decide what to make of him. Over the years, people who met him began to tell their stories, not as religious lessons, but as moments that helped them see themselves more clearly. And through those stories, Drukpa Kunley gradually became a cultural symbol, not just a religious figure. He became a reminder that enlightenment can appear in a form society is not ready to accept. But as his fame spread, bigger questions began to surface. Was his method a sign of wisdom or a danger to tradition? Can someone move beyond social norms and still keep the heart of Buddhism? Those questions were not asked only in Kunley's time. They still exist in Tibetan Buddhism today. And as Drukpa Kunley continued wandering through the Himalayas, he left behind more than anecdotes. He left behind a challenge to how people understand enlightenment. The final years of Drukpa Kunley's life were not recorded in royal chronicles or official monastery documents. Just as he lived, his traces survived more in folk memory, in stories retold across generations, and in cultural symbols people continued to preserve without needing to explain them. As old age arrived, Drukpa Kunley did not build a monastery. He did not establish an official lineage. He did not select a successor student the way many lamas of his time did. This surprised many people, because with the knowledge and social influence he had, Kunley could have become one of the most powerful religious leaders in the Himalayas. But he refused. Some traditions say that when he was asked why he did not establish a lineage, he answered, "If the teachings need to be protected by structure, then maybe people are protecting the structure, not the teachings." Kunley did not try to build anything that would survive after his death. He lived as if what he left behind had to exist in the way people look back at themselves. In the year 1529, Drukpa Kunley died. There is no clear record of where he died. There is no grand tomb. That fits his life perfectly. A life that never clung to image. But after he died, something unexpected happened. His influence did not disappear. It spread. In Bhutan, stories about Kunley became part of cultural identity. People did not remember him only as a practitioner. They remembered him as a protective saint. Fertility symbols continued to be painted on house walls as signs of blessing. The temple of Chimi Lhakhang continued to draw couples from across the country who came to pray. Meanwhile, in Tibet, his image continued to spark debate. Some traditions honor him as an embodiment of Tantric wisdom. Some scholars view him as a symbol of internal critique within Buddhism. Some people still see him as a controversial figure. That very division is what makes Drukpa Kunley one of the most complex figures in the history of Vajrayana Buddhism, because he cannot be easily placed into a single mold. For centuries after his death, Buddhist scholars began analyzing the phenomenon he represented. They called it a tradition of rule-breaking wisdom, a spiritual method that appears when religion is at risk of becoming only a formal system. According to many Tantric texts, practitioners like Kunley emerge as a balancing force. When ritual becomes more important than experience, when spiritual identity becomes another form of ego, when discipline turns into performance. But Tibetan tradition also stresses a very clear warning. Crazy wisdom is not a license for chaos. It can appear only when a practitioner has completely moved beyond personal ego. If not, it can become a tool used to justify desire and power. The history of Vajrayana Buddhism has no shortage of controversies tied to the misuse of the image of rule-breaking wisdom. And that is why Drukpa Kunley is always seen through two lenses at once. One lens sees him as an enlightened master. The other lens questions the line between enlightenment and danger. In many modern studies, Drukpa Kunley is often compared to the trickster figure in symbolic psychology. A trickster is a character who appears when society becomes too rigid. They break order not to destroy society, but to renew it. But unlike the trickster in mythology, Kunley did not exist only in stories. He was a real person. He walked through real valleys. He spoke with real people, and he left a real impact on Himalayan culture. In modern Buddhism, the story of Drukpa Kunley continues to raise a question that many spiritual traditions have to sit with. Can the path to enlightenment exist When people cling tightly to the image of what an enlightened person is supposed to look like, maybe it was precisely because Kunley refused to play the role of a saint that he became a symbol that forces people to think about what enlightenment truly means. Some scholars argue that Drukpa Kunley represents religion's deepest fear, that if people achieve true inner freedom, they may no longer need religious structures to define who they are. But those who honor him see it differently. They believe he did not break religion. He broke the shell that made religion lose its original spirit. If a person no longer needs to prove they are practicing correctly, could they be living closer to freedom? And maybe that is why his story has been told for more than 500 years. Not to glorify a saint, but to remind us that the spiritual path may never be as simple as people want it to be. If Drukpa Kunley lived in the modern world, would he be called an enlightened master, or just someone who makes society uncomfortable because he refuses to live inside the role society expects? What do you think? Do you believe practitioners like Drukpa Kunley help protect the true spirit of religion? Or do they make the line between wisdom and chaos dangerously unclear? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story opened up a new way of seeing enlightenment and inner freedom for you, please like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the strange and deeply powerful spiritual journeys hidden throughout human history.